Here is the paradox that nobody in this story wants to say out loud. Washington and Tehran have been negotiating, on and off, for over 40 years. Not always formally. Not always publicly. But the back channels have almost never gone completely dark. Curious, and yet every time a new round of talks begins, both sides perform the same ritual: the outrage, the ultimatums, the declarations that this time is different, that this time there is nothing to discuss. The clock in this story has no hands. It keeps moving, centrifuges spinning, sanctions tightening, oil prices shifting, but the official time never seems to change. Size, the public narrative is always either on the verge of war or on the verge of a deal. It has been that way since 1979. What I want to do today is cut through that performance and show you what the historical record actually says about how Washington and Tehran reach understandings, because they have, repeatedly, and almost never in the way the headlines described. And once you see the pattern, the question of whether an agreement is possible today becomes a very different question than the one the media is asking. I have traced the documented history of US-Iran back-channel contacts from the hostage crisis through the Iran-Contra affair, through the Khatami-era overtures, through the Obama back-channel that preceded the JCPOA, and through the quiet understandings that have punctuated every administration since. Thoughtful, what the record shows is a system that is far more pragmatic behind closed doors than either government is willing to admit in public. The gap between what is said and what is done in this relationship is, I would argue, the most important analytical fact about it. Size, and it is the fact that most coverage systematically ignores. Here is my thesis: a formal agreement between Washington and Tehran is structurally unlikely and probably unnecessary, because the two sides have a long and documented history of reaching informal understandings that serve their core interests without requiring either government to defend a treaty to its domestic audience. Thoughtful, the real question is not whether they can agree. It is whether the current pressure is sufficient to make both sides want to. Let me build this from the beginning, because the history here is the argument. Thoughtful, the first documented tacit arrangement between Washington and Tehran that most people forget about is the one that ended the hostage crisis in 1981. The official story is that Iran released the hostages because Ronald Reagan was inaugurated and Tehran feared him more than Carter. The fuller picture, documented by the Tower Commission and later by investigative reporting in the New York Times and elsewhere, involves back-channel contacts through Algeria, through third-party intermediaries, and through financial arrangements involving frozen Iranian assets. It was not a treaty. It was not even publicly acknowledged as a negotiation by either side. But it worked. Size, the hostages came home. The assets moved. That is the template. Not a formal agreement signed in public. A set of understandings reached through intermediaries, structured so that neither side has to acknowledge what it actually agreed to. The second case that almost never gets cited in current coverage is the Iran-Contra affair of 1986. Whatever your read on the political scandal, the underlying transaction is analytically revealing. The Reagan administration, the administration that had declared Iran a state sponsor of terrorism, that had imposed sanctions, that had publicly vowed never to negotiate with Tehran, was selling weapons to Iran. Not through a formal channel. Through intermediaries. Through Israel as a conduit. And the rationale, beyond the hostage angle, involved a set of implicit understandings about Iranian behavior in Lebanon and the Gulf. Again, not a treaty. Not a public acknowledgement. A tacit arrangement that served specific interests on both sides, structured to be deniable. The third case is the Khatami era, from 1997 to 2001. Mohammad Khatami's reformist presidency generated genuine optimism in Washington about a possible opening. The Clinton administration made quiet gestures, easing restrictions on certain Iranian goods, allowing wrestling teams to compete. Tehran made reciprocal signals. The Council on Foreign Relations documented this period extensively. Nothing formal emerged. But the temperature dropped. Trade in certain categories increased. And the relationship, while never normalized, became less actively dangerous for several years. Then came the fourth and most instructive case, the back channel that produced the JCPOA. What the public saw in 2015 was a multilateral nuclear agreement signed in Vienna. What the historical record shows, documented in Ben Rhodes's memoir, in reporting by the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, and in subsequent academic analyses, is that the real negotiation began at least 2 years earlier, in secret, in Oman. Not through the formal P5+1 framework. Through a bilateral US-Iran back channel that Oman's Sultan Qaboos helped facilitate. By the time the public knew a deal was being negotiated, the core structure was already agreed. The multilateral format was, in significant part, a diplomatic staging, a way to give both sides domestic cover for what had already been decided in private. That is the pattern. And that pattern is still available today. Now, the counter-argument, and this is where the current situation genuinely differs from those precedents. The IRGC's economic integration into the Iranian system has deepened significantly since 2015. According to analyses from the Council on Foreign Relations and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the Revolutionary Guards now control a larger share of the Iranian economy than at any previous point. Any agreement that involves financial transparency, sanctions relief flowing through official Iranian government channels, or integration with international banking systems creates a direct threat to the parallel financial architecture that the IRGC has built. This is the structural obstacle that is qualitatively different from the 1981 or 2015 situations. In those cases, the Iranian government could make deals because the economic interests of the security establishment were not directly threatened by the deal's terms. Today, they might be. The second genuine complication is Israel. And here I want to be analytically precise rather than politically charged. In 1981, in 1986, and even in 2013 and 2015, Israel's ability to functionally veto a US-Iran understanding was limited. Washington could move through back channels faster than Jerusalem could mobilize political opposition. The JCPOA was announced as a fait accompli, and while Israel protested loudly, the deal held for 3 years. The current situation is different in one specific way. The domestic US political architecture around Israel and Iran has become more rigid. According to Brookings Institution analyses of congressional voting patterns on Iran-related legislation, the political cost to any US administration of being seen to accommodate Tehran has risen substantially since 2018. That does not make a tacit agreement impossible, but it narrows the channel through which it can move. The third layer is the one the media almost entirely ignores: China's position. China is Iran's largest oil customer. According to EIA and CPLR tracking data, China absorbs somewhere between 80 and 90% of Iran's current oil exports, most of it at a discount to market price. This arrangement is economically beneficial to both parties. Iran gets a buyer that ignores Western sanctions, China gets discounted energy. But it also means that China has a structural interest in the status quo continuing. A Washington-Tehran normalization that brought Iran back into Western oil markets would reduce Chinese access to discounted Iranian barrels. This is not a conspiracy. It is a straightforward alignment of economic interests. But it means that Beijing, which is often portrayed in coverage as a potential mediator or honest broker in this conflict, actually benefits from the conflict remaining unresolved at a low enough level to keep the oil flowing but high enough to keep Iran isolated from Western markets. That is the system. Iran needs a deal to survive economically. Washington needs a deal to stabilize oil markets and reduce the risk of a conflict it cannot fully control. Beijing needs the deal not to happen, or to happen only partially. And the IRGC needs the deal not to happen, or to happen on terms that preserve its economic architecture. For actors, 2 want an agreement. 2 benefit from its absence. That is not a stalemate. It is a pressure cooker with a very specific release valve: Oman. Washington has 3 structural options at this moment. Option 1. Pursue a formal multilateral agreement through existing frameworks, the P5+1 successor format, UN mechanisms, the IAEA as verification backbone. The cost is time, visibility, and the political exposure that comes with a public negotiation. The benefit is legitimacy and durability. Thoughtful, the problem is that both the IRGC and Beijing have strong incentives to ensure this option fails, and they have demonstrated the capacity to do so. Option 2. Replicate the Oman model. A bilateral back channel, deniable on both sides, focus not on a comprehensive nuclear agreement but on a specific set of behavioral understandings, enrichment caps, oil flow volumes, proxy restraint in specific theaters. No public signing ceremony. No Senate ratification. Curious, a working arrangement that both governments can deny and both can benefit from. The historical record suggests this is the option that has actually worked before. Option 3, managed confrontation. Neither agreement nor escalation, but a calibrated pressure campaign designed to keep Iran at the table without pushing it to the point of breakout. This is essentially the policy of the last several administrations, and it has produced a situation where Iran's nuclear program is more advanced than it has ever been. It is the option that looks like a strategy but functions as an absence of one. Scenario 1. The Oman Channel reopens quietly. Within the next 12 months, a set of tacit understandings is reached, enrichment frozen at current levels, Iranian oil exports to Asia tolerated at current volumes, US refraining from new sanctions targeting specific categories. No announcement. No ceremony. Thoughtful, analysts notice the temperature drop. Markets price in reduced Gulf risk. Neither government admits anything happened. This is the scenario with the strongest historical precedent. Scenario 2. A provocation breaks the channel before it opens. An incident in the Gulf, a proxy attack on US or Israeli interests, a domestic Iranian political crisis that forces the new supreme leader to demonstrate hardness, any of these could reset the pressure to a level where even a back-channel conversation becomes politically untenable on the US side. Concerned, this is the scenario that benefits China and the IRGC most directly. Scenario 3. A formal agreement attempt that fails publicly. The Biden JCPOA revival attempt of 2021 and 2022 is the recent template. Both sides approach a deal. Domestic politics on one or both sides make the final steps impossible. The process collapses visibly, and the collapse is used by hardliners on both sides to argue that negotiation is inherently futile. This is the scenario that makes the next attempt harder. Scenario 4. Economic collapse in Iran forces the issue. If inflation, currency devaluation, and fiscal exhaustion reach a level where the Iranian government cannot maintain basic social stability, the calculus inside the system changes, not necessarily toward moderation, but toward desperation. Desperate actors make unpredictable moves. This is the scenario that carries the most tail risk for everyone, including Beijing. If you are the kind of person who has learned to be skeptical of official narratives, who has noticed that what governments say they are doing and what they are actually doing are often two different things, then the history of US-Iran relations is one of the cleanest case studies you will find. Thoughtful, the healthy skepticism I want you to take from this is not cynicism. It is precision. When you see headlines about Iran talks collapsing, ask yourself, which channel collapsed? The public one or the real one? Curious, when you see headlines about a breakthrough, ask yourself, who is this announcement designed to serve domestically, and what has already been agreed privately? The clock in this story has no hands because both sides need the clock not to move publicly while the real negotiations happen in rooms that do not appear on any official schedule. Understanding that mechanism does not make you a conspiracy theorist. It makes you a more accurate reader of one of the most consequential relationships in contemporary geopolitics. Let me bring the threads together. Washington and Tehran have reached tacit understandings at least 4 times in the last 45 years, each time through channels that both sides officially denied. Thoughtful, the current moment has genuine structural complications that previous rounds did not: a more economically embedded IRGC, a more politically rigid US domestic environment, and a Chinese economic interest in the status quo. But the core mechanics that made previous arrangements possible have not disappeared. The question is not whether an agreement is possible. The record says it is. Curious, the question is whether the pressure on both sides is currently sufficient to make the back channel worth the political risk of opening it. And on that question, the economic data from Iran and the oil market data from the Gulf suggest the pressure is building toward a threshold, not there yet, but moving. What the clock without hands tells you is this: at some point, someone will announce that a deal has been reached, or that talks have collapsed, or that tensions have eased, and by the time that announcement comes, the real conversation will have been over for months. So here is my question for you, given everything you just heard about how these arrangements actually work, the Oman model, the deniability requirement, the Chinese incentive structure, which actor do you think is the most likely to disrupt a back-channel agreement before it can take hold, and why? I will feature the most analytically rigorous answer in the next video. Sources are listed below. See you in the next one.